Alright, guys, everything is burning down. It's all going down in a ball of flames. The economic war is now wrapping up, and not just with China, but with Russia as well. Now, the administration is going on the offensive, and big sanctions are coming back. Now, this is bizarre because during the campaign trail, Trump himself admitted that sanctions were literally destroying the US economy. Trust in the entire financial system will be compromised, how the US dollar will be damaged, and how he will dismantle the sanctions once elected. But the exact opposite is happening now. Scott Bessent is now wrapping up the pain on Russia's economy. The US Treasury is going to sanction Russia's two biggest oil producers, and this is a big one. Rosneft and Lukoil are now targets of US sanctions. These are Russian oil giants, and they produce and export the majority of Russian crude. So, yes, this is a big deal. The US wants to cut away revenue that funds Russia's war chest, but the implications here are global. It's not just US companies or entities who can't do business with Rosneft or Lukoil. We are headed back to the chaos in 2022. In addition to the tariff war, we now have big sanctions that can cascade to an absolute disaster in the oil markets. According to the Treasury, all property of the oil giants can be blocked or frozen if they are within the United States. Well, we can be sure that China and other BRICS countries are watching this debacle in real time. Money will be flowing out, it won't be going in. But here's the dangerous part: foreign financial institutions dealing with them run the risk of being sanctioned by the United States. So, if a Chinese bank or an Indian bank handles trade finance for Lukoil, Bessent might cut them away from US financial networks. And that obviously would mean cutting the bank away from SWIFT, the dollar system, and maybe getting their own assets frozen as well. All bets are off. We do not know how far reaching this could get. Now, Trump could always stack secondary sanctions in the form of tariffs as well. So, if any country buys Russian oil, they could face bigger tariffs selling to US markets. And that would be even more brutal than a $60 oil price cap imposed by Biden. Now, we are seeing an administration that desperately wants to close down the Eastern Front. Trump is gearing up for a big confrontation with China, and the US oil sector is getting hammered with Beijing walking away.
Today is a very big day in terms of what we're doing. Look, these are tremendous sanctions. These are very big. Those are against their two big oil companies, and we hope that they won't be on for long. We hope that the war will be settled. We just answered having to do with the various forms of missiles and everything else that we're looking at, but we don't think that's going to be necessary. We would like to see them just take the line that has been formed over quite a long period of time and go and let's go home.
So Trump is fine with Russia keeping the land captured and to just go home. The US really wants a ceasefire, and there are multiple ways to look at this. It's a mixture of geopolitical and economic panic for Trump. Now, the first immediate impact is to rescue what's left of the US oil industry. If you sanction Russian oil with global sanctions, then most countries will be afraid of importing it in. And that allows you to wriggle in trade deals with US oil supply, and it's not that complex. This is a short term relief valve for the US oil industry. Now, China has completely eliminated their imports of American energy, a complete import embargo of coal, crude oil, and natural gas. Chinese demand has dropped from over $1 billion a month to zero. China's replacing US volumes from everywhere else, and that includes Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, and of course Canada as well. It's a response to Trump's tariff war. So the US has an oversupply of energy they need to sell, and the longer they sit on the stockpiles, the more money is burned storing the oil. The entire energy sector is in crisis mode today. When you decide to tariff the world, you slow down global trade. There's now less manufacturing happening, and shipping goods are definitely going to drop. What happens? Oil demand crashes, and so does the price of oil. You don't need to be a genius to figure this one out. And the US is feeling the pain. Oil prices have dropped by nearly 20%, squeezing Trump's oil sector. There are now 13% fewer rigs drilling for oil in the US versus a year back. Employment in oil and gas production is also down 3% so far. The lower the price of oil drops, the bigger the breakdown of the sector. What's the point of drilling for oil when selling prices are below your cost of production? And that's why Bessent's sanction on Russia, at least in the short term, is a strategic one. If you prevent the world from buying crude from Putin, you naturally will constrict supply. The sanctions caused oil prices to jump by over 3% in a single trading session. And if you can force Europe or even Japan with the specter of sanctions, you can drive demand for US crude up. Now, the end goal might be a ceasefire, but the short term benefits are really obvious for big oil companies in the US. Bessent is trying to convince the world of the sanctions, but it's really easy to look past the words. We just need to think a little.
There have been behind the scenes talk, but I believe that the president is disappointed at the where we are in these talks. So either this evening or first thing tomorrow morning, we are going to be announcing a substantial increase in Russia's sanctions. I'm not going to give you the exact sanctions, but I can tell you that this will be one of the largest sanctions that we have done against the Russian Federation.
The long term agenda is to form an economic partnership with Russia, and you obviously can't do that if a war is going on. Now, just think a bit, what is the biggest existential crisis facing the US versus China today? Now, back in March, the US and Russia were discussing rare earth metal projects. To essentially develop the resource together with Russia, Russian land has a ton of metals beneath the earth. Now, the US estimates at least 3.8 million tons that's ready for development. Russia says they have nearly 29 million tons of rare earths spread across 15 elements. Either way, that's a lot of minerals the US needs, especially with China squeezing them today. And if Russia takes over Ukrainian land, which Trump is happy to give, remember he's the king of the world, right? The rare earth reserves would be even bigger. So you can see the incentive to end the conflict now. The problem with this move is how it encourages the world, especially BRICS, to move away from the US even more. China's economy also benefits greatly from this. If India, Japan, and Europe they all obey the sanctions, China is still going to import Russian crude. It's not going to stop. It will benefit the Chinese industrial base. Today, almost 50% of Russian crude goes to China. That's more than India and the EU combined. And we best believe China is already getting a nice discount from Russian oil producers. Now imagine if China absorbs 100% of Russian barrels. How much leverage will that give China? That's how badly the oil sanctions will backfire, because we know the administration cannot hammer China directly. So we could have a situation where the world could see a $10 or $20 increase per barrel, but China gets a discount instead. And this will make Chinese exports even more competitive. Now, while this mess rolls on, the US is opening yet another front with China. And this time, technology punishments are coming to Beijing. Bessent has said everything is on the table. Now, the list of threats is starting to stack up. Not only do we have 100% additional tariff coming, this time US services could be weaponized against China. Now, Bessent is warning of broad software curbs on the Chinese economy. Companies could be barred from purchasing or using a wide range of critical software. And this move would be done in conjunction with their G7 allies. So, not just American software, maybe those from Europe and even Japan as well. It's broad based, and this is truly a very risky move. Will this cause disruptions in key industries? Will this hurt China? Most definitely, but beware the blowback effects down the road. Software is a very broad term. This could include SaaS products or software as a service. Will this include sales platforms or enterprise resource planning? You know, those boring platforms all the HR managers use? The plan probably is to threaten China's chip industry. That might be the real agenda. The US has pulled this stunt in the past. Before the London talks, China was hit with chip design software curbs from Trump. It was eventually lifted, but Bessent could always reimpose them again. Companies like Synopsys and Cadence, semiconductor designers, needed to get US licenses before exporting software all the way to China. They dominate chip design, so their supply could be weaponized once again. The problem is how far reaching this could get. Will the US go all the way to force a Chinese settlement on rare earths? And this can go way beyond chips and literally impact global exports to China. Now, this curb could include exports made by US software. So, laptops to jet engines to almost everything else could be banned from selling to China. If a factory in Germany makes something using a piece of US software, they need Washington's approval before selling to China. Now, this sounds good on paper, sounds brilliant at first. If China hammers our industrial base, we will starve them from critical software and US designed products. But there are big problems with this move. Firstly, most things in the world are already made in China, so only certain industries will get clobbered. Secondly, the US is still highly dependent on Chinese exports. Despite the tariffs, Chinese goods are still flowing into the US in huge amounts. Yes, exports are down by 17% this year, but Chinese companies are still shipping a ton of goods to the US, almost $1 billion worth of stuff a day. If American consumers are still willing to pay a 50% tariff or more to get Chinese goods, it really tells you how uncompetitive US industries are. This whole situation can get from bad to ridiculous in a heartbeat. Imagine what would happen if this suddenly collapses. US inflation will spike through the roof, especially for everyday consumers. China could also play around with payment terms. Instead of getting paid in dollars, Chinese exporters might just demand the RMB, their local currency instead. And this would mean US consumers could be helping Beijing de-dollarize global trade. That is how crazy things can essentially get. We are really caught in a doom loop spiral where neither side can back down. China won't stop the rare earth curbs until they get concessions, but Bessent and friends, they don't want to budge. Instead, they are re-escalating things. Guys, even if the software curbs happen, China will out-innovate the United States. If they can build AI chips, if they can build DeepSeek, creating other parts of the software supply chain isn't impossible. It's just a matter of time. China's R&D has already exceeded the US in 2024 and 2025. US investment was just 4.7% over the last few years. For China, it's at 8.9%. But this is the crazy part. R&D in China is 2.3 times more efficient than the US because of the cost. You have labor, expertise, and the supply chains. They are much more affordable versus the US. This is the key difference, which means sooner or later, Chinese tech will catch up with the United States, not just in AI chips, but software as well. So Bessent's new curbs will only force Beijing to innovate even harder and accelerate the timeline. Will the US do a U-turn? No, I don't think so. The Trade Department is doubling down on their narrative of China coercing the world, so we are headed towards a really, really nasty collision.
And now you hear a lot of narratives from the Chinese side of their surrogates saying, well, the Americans have put a lot of controls on us over the past few years, or they put out a new rule that would, to avoid evasion of U.S. export controls that they didn't like, or their fees on ships. So they're trying out a lot of different narratives when the reality is they just want to exert economic control on the world. They started in April with the rare earth magnets. They're using anything else that has happened as a pretext.
But let me know what you think. Will Bessent's punishment on Russian oil force Putin to concede? And will China cave to this technology export ban? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe. Be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.